Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Linda.
Nancy, I think you know this, but I'm Linda Lambert, and I'm talking with you today. You have 3 poems published in Spring and All. Let's see. You've probably seen the cover, but here it is.
I love the cover. It's
I
beautiful.
know, isn't it great? I love it too. It's so colorful and bright and representative of the theme of it. Anyway, you have 3 poems in there. This anthology was written and edited by Red Wheelbarrow Writers and published by Sidekick Press. Nancy's poetry has been published all over the place. And this is just one of the places. And I noticed that that you had a poem in the just published book, I Sing the Salmon Home. I think I have a copy of that here too. That was edited by Rena Priest, the state poet laureate, although a new one has been named. So the names of your poem in the Red Wheelbarrow anthology are, let's see. Our Old Lady of the Salmon Run. That's in the Rena Priest book. In My Garden, Old Growth. And then there's one more, which is?
That's the one about my brother.
Yes.
I have a kitchen table.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. One of the things as I was reading through your poetry that I particularly like is your use of words which are not obscure necessarily, but sometimes they're a little bit unusual. And I like that because it draws me to look them up and say, oh, that's curious. That's an interesting word. And so I made a little list of them.
Okay.
In Old Lady of the Salmon Run, you had Lee Bon, not a person I was figured with. You had the word milt and pars and smolts.
Right.
And they do what I think unusual words should do. You are drawn to them. You want to know what they mean. You want to know how they figure in your poem. And they draw attention to themselves, but not in a show-offy kind of way. So I really like a poet who uses unusual language. And there were words in My Garden that I didn't know either. And maybe it's because I'm not so much a gardener, but bombus, drupelets, lettuce birds, and brassica. Did I mispronounce any of those?
I don't think so.
And then in Old Growth, I hadn't heard of lungwort lichen. So you're very much a nature poet. And I always feel like when I read your poems, I'm learning something from them.
Yeah.
And I'm also wondering, how do those unusual words come to you? Is it sort of organic? Does it happen or what?
Yeah, I as I'm writing the poem and listening to the sounds of the poem, I thought, well, I could have bumblebee, but I know there's a special kind of bumblebee. So and I have a friend who is a beekeeper, and she said, oh, you're really lucky to have those little, she called them something. So then I looked up the bumblebees, and there's these tiny little bumblebees that I found their names. So that's how that kind of came about.
Huh.
And then also the sound of drupelets. Like I was thinking, well, a raspberry, when the bees are pollinating that berry, there's all those little round pieces that are put together into the berry. So yeah. I know that. So I wanted to know what it was called, and I looked that up. So that's kind of how my words come, as I look up things as I'm researching, actually, what I'm writing about.
That's pretty much my process too, whether I'm doing fiction or nonfiction. And it's kind of looking for precision for what you want to say. And as you mentioned, you go for sound. That reminds me of the poetry book that I took Ron Leatherbarrow's class at Whatcom Community College. And the book that we used was called sound and sense. And aren't those two of the most important elements in poetry?
Right, right. And as a teacher of writing, I that's what I ask people to do too, is to use their senses in their description, because it gives so much more if we can see a color or smell. What, if there's words that describe a smell, which I think are maybe one trickier ones, and
Yes.
yeah. So yes, hear something.
Have you always been a poet? I mean, I know you're a painter. Did you have an interest in poetry as a young girl, for example, or did you come to it later?
As a very young girl, I tried my hand at fiction because I read a lot of mysteries. Probably Nancy Drew inspired me. And
Yes.
then by high school, my sister was quite prolific with her poetry. And she made earrings and wrote poetry and took them around and sold them places.
Really?
Yeah. And so
Older or younger sister?
she's younger. So
Huh.
I said, well, I can write a poem. So I wrote a poem, and she said, oh, that's terrible.
Thanks, sis.
So I didn't really write any more poems for a long time. And then I started writing poems when I was doing a lot of healing work from the way I grew up, that I started writing poetry and drawing terrible little pictures that describe things. And but it was really helpful, and it was a process for me. So that's kind of the beginning. So my first poetry book, Saltwater, has a lot of those healing poems.
Mm-hmm.
Childhood.
Well, I haven't talked to any other poet who has come to poetry through healing, but that seems a natural thing to me. Therapy can occur in all kinds of ways, and it's interesting that you chose poetry as part of your healing process.
Right. And for a long time, I was in a movement group, a healing movement group. And we talked about, before we went online, my drum that I made. And so I would have my sketchbook, and I had my drums. So I do drumming, and then I would sketch or paint a little something. And as I did that, words came to me that I wrote down on the other page that
Ooh.
were kind of made a poem. So I felt like it was sort of an intuitive process.
How does painting and the visual arts factor in with poem making? You just have referenced that in a way, but say a little
Right.
bit about that.
Well, as a painter, I realized recently, because I kind of got into a dry place in my painting, and I decided that, well, I'll just stick with my writing for now, because I'm working on this memoir and it's almost done. So stick with that, and then go back to the painting when that's done. And then, but I went back to the painting anyway before the book was done, and I realized that it really helped the book for me to go and paint and not have words in my head, just to be painting. So I'm not sure how it facilitates each other, that it's one is maybe more cerebral than the other.
More cerebral, and it also sounds like one could be a catalyst for the other.
Yes, yeah, I think so.
If you had a dry period for a time, and then you were working on poetry, and then you felt like you needed that other artistic expression.
Right.
Do you generally tend to work on both writing and painting? It seems like I have known of your work, but first I knew of your work as a painter.
Right. I kind of work where I'm inspired. So right now I have a little press my husband bought me a couple of years ago for my birthday. And
lovely.
Yeah, and so I have so I've just started again to use that. I was kind of, during COVID, I was not at my studio a lot. The building kind of shut down. Artists still went, but everybody was so nervous about it. So I was kind of away for a while, working at home. I did a lot of collage then. But then when so I picked up now with making little prints. So they're very tiny. It's not a big press, but what I like is the surprise in it. And I guess that's what I like about writing too, is the surprise in it, where things come that I'm not expecting, and then I get to look at them and go like, Oh, that's so beautiful. How did I do that? Well, I didn't really do it. I just, I'm kind of part of the process.
It's a good feeling when you have that experience. It's kind of an aha experience. Well, that's not bad what I wrote, and it just came to me. So you sort of feel like a funnel of inspiration.
Which I truly believe in. And in the
Yeah.
generative writing that I do, I attempt always to just let it come through me rather than me thinking it up. So back to our first question, where do I come up with these words? That those don't just generally come to me, those I research, so that there's that process of one letting it in and the other kind of like manipulating it till it's the way I want it to be finished.
Well, I always find that research itself is a generative process. In fact, when I start a piece, I will often start, this is just what I do, going to the Oxford English Dictionary and looking up all of the meanings and the history of the words. And usually when I do that and I read phrases that other people have written, other ideas come to me. And so in that way, I may use those definitions or I may not, but it revs up the is inspiring to me. And I think we're kind of talking about the same sort of thing. How does that work with your memoir? Is the writing process any different?
The memoir has been really an interesting process because it's kind of changed through a number of years. But I started it all. I do a writing practice that I learned from Natalie Goldberg in 97 when I really started applying myself to my writing. I went to Taos, New Mexico. So I do that writing practice. And that writing practice is write fast, don't edit, especially don't edit. That's the big thing, because she always talks about the first word from the bottom of the mind, which is the unedited version, because we get trained out of saying those first words. So I wrote it all that way, and it was really like a lot of connected vignettes. And then I wrote pieces that were like chronological. So then it didn't really work all together. So I've had to rewrite, but that's how it works, is that it's just flowing in and I put it down and then I start to edit it.
You're lucky to have discovered Natalie Goldberg in the 90s. I don't remember when I came to Writing Down the Bones, but I think it was a little bit after that. And then she ended up being on a panel that I moderated at Chuck and I Writers Conference one year. And I actually have her book on Audible, and I just turn it on every once in a while because it always inspires me. And I think of her writing with all of those notebooks that she has. So, so I think you are an interesting example of how you used her, just sort of free writing and then writing more intentionally. And then you had to kind of combine those two approaches.
Right, to really shape it and have scenes that have a setting, and maybe I didn't get everything in, so or maybe not enough dialogue or something, so then I have to correct it a little bit in the editing process.
Did you ever get blocked during that time?
Well, interesting. I'm not a blocked writer, so I haven't had writer's block, and sometimes I'll come to end a project and think, what next? But I have so much. I'm so generative that I usually have something I can select and begin working on again, which is different than going to the art studio and painting. So I do have blocks there sometimes.
I wonder what the difference is, why you would have blocks in painting, but not necessarily in writing.
Well, there's one part of this whole process that may be a clue to me, is that the writing is not really generating very much money, where the painting, I do put it out for sale. So I know that it's always been difficult for me to let go of the idea that, will this sell? Is this good enough to sell?
Yeah.
So I've thought about that. I have a coach who helps me with my art and writing, kind of just like moving me past things that have restricted me in my artistic pursuits. And we've talked about that a lot, like the making money off of art or not making money off of art. And I have made money off of art, that's for sure, but
Yeah.
I don't live off of it. But I love it. So in a way, I do live off of it.
You intellectually and emotionally live off of the art
That's,
that you do.
that's
Yeah.
right.
Um, one of the questions that I like to ask writers is, do you have any quirky writerly practices?
I was thinking about that when I read the questions. And well, one thing I do that I think maybe it's quirky, maybe a lot of people do this, is I'll change where I'm writing. So during a process of a poem, and I've gotten it written down maybe by hand at first, and then typed up and printed out. And then I'll go into a different room
Really?
and read it in that room. And then I'll come back to I have this little extra bedroom that's my writing room. And then I'll print it, make the changes in my copy, print it out. Then I'll go to the living room and read it. Or I'll go to the kitchen table or even on the back porch or something. So I change where I am in space.
I talked to a writer the other day who just wants to sit at the same table with the same pens and pencils and gets security from that. So that's very different from you. So maybe we have different quirks.
Definitely, probably there are different quirks. Another thing, and I don't think this is necessarily a quirk, but I read my work out loud, even in my memoir, which is very long, 95,000 words.
Oh,
So
it is long.
yeah, it is long. But I definitely read if I hear things that I don't see when I'm looking at the screen and reading. So that's a good process.
I'm in a writing group that's all we do. Every Friday we read what we're writing, and it is amazing how many things you detect that aren't quite right or maybe need fleshing out. So I will almost always read something out loud that I have written just to see where it needs improvement. Do you have a writing group that you're in?
I have a writing group that I lead, that Wild Haven Writers, we've named ourselves, and we actually are putting together a book on abortion stories. So that poems and essays. So that's kind of in process. And I had a critique group that disbanded in the pandemic, and which is unfortunate. And I have a Friday little group that we meet and generate writing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a critique group at this point. I
Oh,
don't think my former group is going to come back together.
you don't think they are? Or you do think they are?
I don't think they are. I think, they're still, well, a number of them got so troubled by the pandemic that even when it seemed safer, we could meet in my studio or something, they still didn't want to. So, so it really, I think, changed a lot for artists, the pandemic.
Yes, I think it did change a lot for
Yeah.
artists. I haven't asked you about what authors you like or what poets you like or what reading influenced you in the past. That's a multitude of questions. Sorry.
Well, I have a number of poet friends. Kelly Agadon is one of my good friends. We went to graduate school together, and I love her poetry. And I was reading, I kind of made some notes about who I liked in the books I've been reading, because I don't know, I'm getting older and I'm forgetting some things. I just want to make sure I was prepared.
Yeah.
But Ellen Bass is a really great poet. I love how deeply she goes into things. And so unselfconsciously, she writes about anything. And I really appreciate that and feel like I'm always striving for that, to not have any fear in what I write, that it can be just what my experience is. I also wrote, I wrote this one down, that I read a book recently by Terry Tempest Williams.
Yes.
That I really liked a lot. And what I liked specifically is the detail in there that she uses to describe the landscape. It was about the national parks I don't
I
know if
have that book.
you have it.
Yes.
And then another book I want to find this, I can tell you here. Oh, the other book I just read, The Underland by Robert McFarland. McFarland. And he's this discoverer or an adventurer that has gone underground into caves and different things. And it's very almost like my heart would palpate in some of the places that you go. But he would start things with this like beautiful poetic description of the landscape. And I was totally with him and I was in that place with him. I loved it, really. So those are a couple of different, 2 books and 2 poets. I really like Rena. She was just I like the way she's always got a little chuckle in there when she's reading her poetry. Yeah, that's really fun.
She was a marvelous poet laureate. She was on the go all the time and exhausted, and maybe that's why she got COVID at the end. I don't know, but
Oh, did she? I didn't know that.
yeah,
Oh, that's too bad.
she got pretty sick from it. There was a launch of the I Sing the Salmon home in Olympia, which I went to, and
Oh, right.
she was supposed to be there, but she had COVID. So
Oh, that's too bad.
I think she's regrouped now. I hope she has. Not.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. What you said earlier about COVID's really done a number on artists and painters, artists of all kind, I think is so. But we're all regrouping.
We are regrouping and we are getting out more. And I do know that people are still getting COVID. So I have not had it. So
I haven't either. And
be careful. I'm being careful still.
I'm still being careful too. But we don't have to wear masks on Zoom, do we?
No, and Zoom actually has been a terrific thing for me because I have been able to all through COVID be very busy with my writing, my teaching, and I never slacked off really. In fact, I think I became more busy.
Yeah, we've been busy too, and I'm pleased to have Zoom, and it's still continuing. And this is probably more words exchanged with you than I've ever had. And
That's right. That's
I'm
right.
happy for that. So why don't we conclude this with your reading of some of the writing that you've done? And I think the poem you referenced before would be great.
Okay, so the poem I did reference is called Ring Light on Freshwater Swamp. It's not one of the book in the new book, Spring and All, but it was the Sue Boynton contest, and I have a little poster back here. Move out a little bit, you see the whole poster.
Yeah.
And it's laid out, and I'll show you on there too. It's laid out in this justified print, which I like to do in my poems sometimes, justify them. So I'll just tell you a little background on this. Is I would go to Diamond Lake when I was a child and go fishing with my grandpa out in a little green rowboat. And he'd always fall asleep. It'd be really early in the morning and sunny and kind of warm. I'm fishing away and he's over there snoozing at the other end of the boat. Anyway, Ring Light on Freshwater Swamp. Wooden oars slosh, cutting lazy eddies through narrow channel. Low water turns swampy. Orange flicks and flashes. Sunfish circling murky shoal. Fins wag up to cacophony of insect buzz. Green stalks curl and arch. Chirp, plop, frog kick, deep dive under. Mirrored surface reflects cirrus. Streaks of spilled milk above. Rippling tea below. Stems refract at water break. Black lily roots twist. Gold marbled surface laps. Red-winged blackbirds trill. Dragonflies split past Grandpa's green rowboat.
That's so nicely done. It has a certain fragmentary feel about it as you move from one really pointed descriptive image to another. I liked it quite a bit.
Thank you.
And I'm glad you chose that one to read. And I've really appreciated talking with you for these minutes, and perhaps I will see you at the launch of Spring and All. And thanks for taking this time.
Thank you, Linda. I've enjoyed this a lot.
Great. Bye.
Bye-bye.